mortgage team that has a very specific advantage that could save your family monthly and lifelong money. 2 things you should know. 1, we were started by a dad and his son and his wife and his sister-in-law, and we've grown to be a faith-focused mortgage team that's helping families across the U.S. We're faith and family at our core, and we don't hide it. 2, we've still stayed fairly small, on purpose. We're only about a couple dozen people, a makeup that we believe lets us truly know every person that calls. But we also have a big advantage. Our company is a direct lender, which means our company gets to use its own money and make its own decisions within its own walls. A reality that often allows us to get you a better rate, which could save you monthly and lifelong money. We are United Faith Mortgage at UnitedFaithMortgage.com.
We pay your appraisal fees, up to $500. That's out-of-pocket money you have to pay before closing.
United Mortgage Corp, Melbourne, New York. NMLS number 1330. Ryan Vrecka, NMLS number 65233. For all licensing information, go to NMLSConsumerAccess.org.
Balance of Nature, changing the world one life at a time.
I believe in the product. I really do. Everybody thinks I'm crazy, friggin' snake oil and all the rest. But I'm going to tell you something. I've taken all the snake oil out there, and you're right. Most of it doesn't work. But this stuff does work. There's no doubt about it. I've noticed a big difference in my mobility. Things that I didn't think were going to be possible a few months ago are possible now. And I try to sell it to everybody in my family. Thanksgiving, Christmas, everybody comes over and says, "Oh, you look great." I said, "Yeah, I'm taking this new stuff, Balance of Nature." So if you want to use me as a commercial, I'm a good commercial for this. This works. It really does work.
Experience the Balance of Nature difference for yourself. Right now, Balance of Nature is offering free shipping and 35% off on any new preferred order. Call 1-800-2468-751 or go to balanceofnature.com today and use discount code CHICAGO.
It's open enrollment season, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry that saves most families about $500 a month. Google MediShare and see if it is a fit for you.
8:35. Let's get an update on the roads in the Team Hochberg Traffic Center. Here is Jim Talamonte.
Northbound Tri-State 294. Traffic is snarled from the Grand Avenue curve to Irving Park. A collision there. 2 left lanes are blocked. At the south end of the Tri-State, northbound at Holstead, the exit has just reopened after an issue there. Kennedy inbound, it's 21 minutes, O'Hare to downtown, just a little congested, approaching the Burns Circle. Outbound 20, left lanes have reopened at Montrose after overpass work. Out Eisenhower, 29 minutes, 390 to downtown. Outbound 28. Inbound Stevenson, it's 29 minutes either way between 355 and the drive. Inbound Ryan, delays start at the Stevenson. It's 22 minutes, 95th to downtown. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. From our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center, sunny and 84 today, clear and 61 overnight. 67 degrees at O'Hare. Next news at 9. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. I want to get to the Supreme Court case that has redefined sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, of course, when we're going to do that with David French. But I also want to take note of this. I mentioned it on my syndicated show last night about this Everett Piper. Remember Everett Piper? He used to be the president at Oklahoma Wesleyan University, excoriating evangelical pastors who are pandering to Black Lives Matter. Not because of the idea of promoting racial justice, of course, which Everett Piper is an advocate for, but because Black Lives Matter, if you read their own manifesto, is a neo-Marxist group. And you can be for equality under the law and the proper treatment of all Americans by police without having to hew the orthodoxy of Black Lives Matter. And it seems that there are many that are confused, and so it continues, and as far as I'm concerned. This statement by a couple of dozen evangelical scholars condemning racism as contrary to the evangelical gospel. Yeah, we know. If you feel compelled to give a water is wet statement about racism and you're an evangelical scholar, then you're doing it wrong as far as I'm concerned, or a religious scholar of any denomination. You don't respond to vacuous virtue signaling with its kind. You respond with substance. And this seems to me like the former, not the latter. But that's me. And, I'm mean-spirited. So let's talk to David French, who's a more generous sort. David French, who's a constitutional lawyer, Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran, and, of course, is also senior editor at The Dispatch and a columnist for Time as well. David, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so start with the evangelical scholars and Everett Piper's lambasting of evangelical pastors who were sort of walking in lockstep with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between Black Lives Matter without the caps and Black Lives Matter with the capitals.
Yes.
Which refers to a specific group. And that group is extremely radical. They call for the destruction of the nuclear, the Western prescribed nuclear family. They call for they respect and honor some people, cop killers who fled to Cuba back in the 60s and 70s. And they're extremely radical. But 90% of the people or greater who are saying Black Lives Matter don't know about any of that. They think of it in the lowercase sense, not about the actual group itself. And so, yeah, that the group Black Lives Matter is extremely radical. The concept, the thought, the argument Black Lives Matter is something different from the way people are chanting it and saying it is different from endorsing that group.
Although, but both whether you do first letter caps or not, to me, it strikes me as a straw man argument for the reasonable, respectful person. Yeah, I know. Every life matters. That's my position. That's what I believe. Right. And that's what, obviously, men and women of the cloth believe, men and women of faith believe. So since there's no argument, what are we arguing about?
Well, I think that the problem you have is is that when you have a problem of police brutality and that problem is falling disproportionately on the black population, I think the implication in the slogan is not that Black Lives matter more, that Black lives also matter. They matter equally. And I think that's the intention of what people are chanting and what people are saying. And I don't think the intention is to endorse that group. That I would say probably even 99% of the people who are marching don't even know what that group stands for.
But they do know what a lot of the protesters are demanding, and this is whether you know about the group or not. And all the demands from most quarters are of the identitarian kind, which we've been seeing over the last 50 years, starting incubating on college campuses in Shelby Steele's day all the way to everywhere today, which is I am making a demand for power based on my identity. And if you don't accede to that, now not everybody is taking this position, but some are. If you don't accede to that, then I have the right, the moral obligation even, to burn it down. Nicole Hannah-Jones redefining theft as a symbolic taking, saying violence is wrong in reasonable times, but these aren't reasonable times. And she's, a black scholar, a Pulitzer Prize winner. So you can't just relegate this to people who are capitalizing on the opportunity to steal.
Yeah, I think what you have is a problem where, as so often happens, that you have an illiberal or an authoritarian, or as you would call it, identitarian element that is attempting to hijack a movement that is not motivated by those concerns. So, for example, if you look at actual reform proposals outside of the folks at the Minneapolis City Council who've passed this toothless, thankfully so far, resolution to defund and abolish the Minneapolis Police Department, the vast majority of like the actual concrete political reforms that are being proposed are political reforms that a lot of people from across the spectrum have been seeking for a while, like into qualified immunity, dramatic limits on no-knock raids, and things along those lines, which are extremely reasonable. And then you have an element of the argument that is basically saying, hey, look, if you don't buy into every single aspect of what we say about everything from anti-racism to the form of protest that we prescribe, then you need to lose your job, or you need to be silenced, or you need to be canceled. And so there's this illiberals element of this that is taken over, and particularly, and is dominant, particularly in a lot of progressive quarters that are keeping center-left people who are, sort of looking for these reasonable political solutions, is really bringing the hammer down on those people. Like there was an individual who shared information that protests that are nonviolent tend to be more effective than protests that are violent. He lost his job from
Right.
a progressive data gathering organization, which is absurd, which is totally ridiculous. And that's one of the things that ends up happening in this really negatively polarized environment we're in is that every time you have a movement that sort of grabs the American middle, and this one has. I mean, the polling is unbelievable on how much it has grabbed the great bulk of the American people. And then you're going to have those voices who are trying from the edges to pull it all to them, and being incredibly intolerant and illiberal at the same time. And you have that out there. And fortunately, it has not leaked into the major political proposals of either party yet. Again, with the exception of some city councils here and there that have not quite yet enacted the most radical things they've talked about. But yeah, it's there. It's there. It's very real. It's extremely intolerant, and it's extremely angry. And especially, they just don't allow dissent in their own communities, the communities they control. And I think that has a real risk for a movement that's grabbed a big chunk of the American people.
And do you think that these, protests and some riots, do you think this is going to continue until November 3rd?
Well, the violence is pretty much petered out, thankfully. Not everywhere, but most places.
Yeah.
I do think it will. It'll wax and wane, right? I mean, I don't think it'll be as intense between now and November, but I can imagine it getting more intense the closer we get to the presidential election. I think that, think about how intense things are, and we're not even really into the presidential election yet, which is something that's very sobering to think about. This is going to be an extremely intense election. And so I do think that the protests are going to continue. I'm very hopeful that the violent aspect of them is lost its momentum, and that will not continue. But I expect at the very least the peaceful protests to kind of come and go, and then maybe increase before the election.
In the 6-3 decision, Bostock v. Clayton County yesterday, sex is memorialized in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, was expanded to include sexual orientation and sexual identity. Rod Dreher, writing in the American Conservative, said this: "It is hard to overstate the magnitude of this decision and the size of the loss to religious and social conservatives. SCOTUS has declared that homosexuality and transgenderism are like race. If you disagree, you are on the side of Klansmen, in effect. This is not just the opinion of Democrat lawmakers or columnists at the New York Times. This is now the law of the land, and it became the law of the land thanks to two Republican justices, Roberts and Gorsuch, who were loyal to their class in the clutch."
That's a little That's a little much. That's a lot much. What the ultimate outcome for religious liberty is not yet known, because we have a number of cases pending where the outcome seems promising regarding the extent to which religious liberty protections may be enhanced in coming months. We've got a case involving the ministerial exception, which could be expanded to just a purely functional test, which means that religious organizations are going to be able to define who quote unquote ministers are, not just people who've been trained theologically, but have a function that is to advance the faith and to teach the principles of the faith. And those people will be completely exempt from all operations of all non-discrimination laws. Justice Gorsuch noted in his own opinion that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act acts as a kind of, the quote was, a super statute.
Right.
That modifies even Title VII, the very statute they were writing about. So to call the demise of religious liberty is a little premature. We're going to know an awful lot more in about a year, because there was another very big case the Supreme Court took involving the religious liberty of adoption agencies and foster agencies that in conflict with non-discrimination statutes, where I think it's probable, I mean, maybe not, but I think the reason the court took it is to protect religious liberty. Could be wrong about that. But there's a lot of movement that's positive on religious liberty. So I think to say that that's over now is way premature. And I think it's just wrong to say it's because of Gorsuch's social class. I'm really tired of people saying someone did something that disagreed with me and it was for reasons that were not intellectually honest and corrupt, because why is that the only reason you can disagree? And no, I think that's a little much.
I saw your Twitter thread on this too. You distinguish Gorsuch's, I guess, definition of his own textualism versus Alito's original public meaning approach to the Constitution and to federal statutory law. Describe that for us in terms of as a possible explanation.
Yeah, so what happened here is that the plaintiffs in the case aimed their whole argument directly at Neil Gorsuch, because they knew that there were distinctions between him and some of the other judges and how they look at statutes. So basically, both Gorsuch and Alito started from the same starting place. The word sex used in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 means what sex meant in 1964, biological. It's a fixed biological definition. It's not a definition modified by gender. But then what Alito did is he said, well, wait a minute, okay, let's take that definition. The meaning of that, what that's going to mean for how the statute is going to operate, is still going to be defined by how the drafters thought the statute should operate. And in 1964, none of them thought that this would apply to sexual orientation, and they didn't even know what gender identity was. And then Gorsuch said, well, wait, okay, so sex means what sex means. And so let's talk about what sex means in the context of these cases. And the way he described it was, if you had a guy who brings, like, say, to a company picnic, a man as a date, and you had a woman who brings to a company picnic a man as a date, and the employer fires the man who brought the man as a date, he's saying, well, you're treating the man differently from the woman, even though they engaged in the same action, taking, a man to the company picnic. So while sex is not the only reason for the action, it is inherently part of the reason for the action, and then therefore the Civil Rights Act applies whether the drafters intended that result or not. And Alito says essentially, wait a minute, no, that's not how you read statutes. A statute should not reach a result that the drafters do not intend. And Alito also took aim at Gorsuch's reasoning by also saying, well, if a employer has a policy that says no gay workers, they don't know the sex of the worker when they promulgate the policy. So how could that be based on sex? And then Gorsuch would respond, but on any given worker that they apply it to, there would be an element of this that was based on sex. And so that's what the argument was about. And people knew that this, after the oral argument in this case, most people who were close court watchers knew this was where Gorsuch was leaning. This was not a surprise to anybody, in my view, who's been a close court watcher. So I think that what you're talking about is the differences in approaches to textualism. That Gorsuch would say, look, if the words are the words, and if they reach a meaning that the drafters didn't intend, that's not we've spent a lot of time trying to look at what words mean, and rather than what was in the minds of the people who drafted the statute. And Alito would say, well, wait, if this reaches a meaning that was not the original intended public meaning of this statute, then that's a problem. And that's what it ended up being the debate about.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but and so I guess the predicate question would be, if there's a disagreement about specific intent, or there's a desire to make sure that there's clarity on intent there, then is not the purview of the legislative body and not the judicial one.
Right. One of the original problem here is that you have a very broad sweeping statute, just really broad, and it's short and broad basically. And one of the ironies is that the word sex was actually, a lot of scholars and a lot of observers of the original bill said that the word sex was actually injected as a poison pill into the bill to try to scuttle it. So that, there was a legislator who said, oh, I'm opposed to the Civil Rights Act. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an amendment that's going to just make this thing too broad and people will not agree to pass it. Well, it got passed anyway with his poison pill element in it. And so all of a sudden you have this bill, this law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex on the same basis that it bans discrimination on the basis of race, even though the two things are not the same thing. One of these things is not like the other.
And so how do you, between Alito and Gorsuch, how do you come down in this case if you were in one of the black robes?
Yeah, I've always been much more on the Alito. I've generally been more on the Alito side of statutory constitutional interpretation. But, the differences between the two of them are pretty finely sliced in any given case. I think the other thing that made this tip this over for Gorsuch is that there have been a lot of case law, a lot of stare decisis between now and then that had really sort of said, wait a minute, we're just going to take this word sex for what the word is, and it includes, it includes disparate treatment on the basis of motherhood, it includes disparate treatment on the basis of, stereotyping, it includes disparate treatment, like it includes sexual harassment of men as much as women, and so there was a lot of case law developing here that made this case, as soon as the Supreme Court took it, I thought, oh man, this is a lot closer. A lot of people were thinking, well, this is one where the conservative majority of the court is going to narrow the definition of Title VII. And I thought, I don't know.
I can't look at this, though, without saying that potentially, the sort of the cultural norms and the direction they're heading had some influence. Because, you look at this and as I believe it was Alito noted, the EEOC, well known for its adventurous interpretations, failed to see what Gorsuch contends is obvious for the first 48 years after Title VII became law. So this is, essentially reacting to a recent phenomenon.
Yeah, well, and that's the way the law develops a lot of the time. So, for example, the courts only decide cases that are brought before it. And so, I would say for 20 years, nobody thought to bring a case making the argument of sex-based discrimination like that or more. You often see that in case law where we don't know about the reach of a statute until cases are brought to define the reach of a statute. And that's what, how the Second Amendment hopefully develops, that the Supreme Court really, really took a baseball bat to the Second Amendment yesterday.
Well, I wish we had time for that. But I would just on this case, I would say, the Second Amendment is, enshrined in the Constitution. We've got a lot of jurisprudence on that. We've only been arguing about pronoun usage for the past 5 minutes. So this is a little bit of a quick trigger for the court. But I appreciate your constitutional insights and insights into the jurisprudence of the competing jurists in this case. I think it's helpful. David French, senior editor at the Dispatch, columnist for Time, author of Divided We Fall, America's Secession Threat and How to Restore Our Nation. That is scheduled for release September 22nd. So look for that. David, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.